a mother with her last $50, a first date after 8 years of loneliness, and the man who suddenly stands before her, none other than the husband who once walked away, now a world-famous billionaire. Neither of them knows that it was their 7-year-old daughter, with those green eyes, just like her father's, who quietly orchestrated this meeting. One fateful night, 3 hearts, and a single prayer. This story isn't just about love, but about the courage to forgive, to love again, and to come home. Atlanta in early December carried its signature chill. A dry, cutting wind threading through the streets, brushing against bare trees, leaving behind the damp scent of fallen leaves and memory. In a small apartment in East Atlanta Village, Rose Leslie sat on the edge of her bed, a dim amber lamp casting light over her hands as she counted a few wrinkled bills. $50. She had counted 4 times, and the number never changed. Too little to buy luxury, yet too much for a woman surviving on coupons and cheap dreams. $50, the sum she had saved over 2 months, skipping lunch at the office, walking instead of taking the bus, buying the cheaper cereal even though her daughter didn't like it. $50 she didn't spend on the electric bill or an oil change, but on something rarer: hope. Her first date, after 8 years of being divorced. Rose still wasn't sure why she agreed. Maybe because of Maya, her co-worker and closest friend, who'd said something that kept her awake all night. Ruby needs to see her mum happy. A child only believes in love when she sees joy in her mother's eyes. Those words had convinced Rose to borrow a black dress from Mrs. Chen, the elderly neighbor upstairs. The dress hugged tighter than she remembered, snug around her chest and waist, the soft imprints of motherhood. Mrs. Chen had quietly left a few drugstore cosmetics at her door, a tube of mascara, a bit of foundation, and a pale pink lipstick. No questions asked, no thanks needed. In this neighborhood, kindness was often spoken in silence. In the mirror, Rose saw someone different, her familiar face suddenly distant, her tired eyes brightened by a trace of color and the slightest glimmer of hope. She brushed through her natural curls, hiding a few silver strands, and tried to smile just for herself. Behind her, Ruby's sweet voice rang out, "Mommy, you look like a princess from Frozen." Rose turned. Her daughter stood in the doorway, green eyes catching the light, curls bouncing just like her father's, the man Ruby had never met. The little girl held out a handmade plastic bracelet, offering it solemnly. "For good luck, Mommy," Ruby said, her smile glowing like winter sunlight. Rose knelt and hugged her. "You know, sweetheart, I'm a little scared. It's been so long since I tried something new." Ruby tilted her head, voice gentle as a whisper. "But if you don't try, how will you know what could happen?" Her simple wisdom made Rose laugh, that uncanny mix of innocence and insight that reminded her so much of his father. She took a deep breath and kissed Ruby's forehead. "Thank you, baby. Mommy will be brave." As Rose walked out, Ruby called after her, voice bright as a bell, "Remember, Mommy, bravery looks good on you." Driving toward the restaurant, Christmas lights shimmered on shop windows. Rose sat behind the wheel of her 15-year-old Honda Civic, her hands trembling each time she stopped at a red light. Through the window, she saw women in stylish coats walking beside men who held their hands. For a fleeting moment, she wished someone would reach for hers, not to save her, but to choose her, to see her. At Rosetti's Italian diner, the clock read exactly 7:30. She picked a small table by the window, red and white checkered cloth, the air rich with garlic bread, melting cheese, and soft jazz from a dusty speaker. She set down her purse, smoothed her dress, and checked her phone. No messages, no missed calls. 7:40, 7:55, then 8:10. A young waitress with pink hair leaned in, hesitant. "Would you like to order first, ma'am?" Rose smiled weakly and shook her head. "I'm still waiting for someone." But she already knew no one was coming. She was used to waiting for things that never arrived. She asked for a glass of water, pulled a napkin toward her, and scribbled, "Sometimes courage has a price. Tonight, it costs $50. Just as she was about to leave, a voice rose behind her, low, warm, threaded with memory. "Rose?" Her whole body froze. Her pulse slammed against her ribs. The world blurred, the sounds of the diner fading into silence, leaving only that voice, the one she'd once heard every morning, 8 years ago. Slowly, she turned. And there he was, Chris Brown, no longer the 27-year-old man who'd held her hand at their small wedding in Savannah. Gone was the rumpled shirt of an ambitious young engineer. Standing before her was a tall, composed man in a tailored charcoal suit, his green eyes still clear and deep as ever. In his hands a bouquet of white roses. White roses. For a few seconds, the world simply stopped. Rose stood motionless. After all these years, she still remembered the faint woody scent of his cologne, the way his brow lifted when surprised, and that familiar yet distant look that could still shatter her heart. "You," she started, but the words faltered. Chris smiled, that same smile that used to brighten whole rooms. "I thought there was a mix-up, but it turns out, fate got it exactly right." He set the flowers on the table. "For the lady at table 12. Reservation under Leslie." Rose blinked. That was her Leslie. Her heartbeat quickened. "What are you doing here?" He pulled out a chair and sat down, uninvited, calm and assured. "I'm on a blind date, too. A colleague said there was someone special I should meet." Rose glanced at the flowers, mind tangled. "Who's your friend?" He shrugged lightly. "Someone very persuasive. Said she's a woman who loves family above all else, doesn't care for wealth, and has eyes that smile." Eyes that smile. That was what he used to say about her. Rose leaned back, breath uneven. "So someone tricked us into meeting." Chris held her gaze. "Or maybe someone wanted to see us sitting together again." The light caught his eyes green with a trace of fatigue, the kind that only comes from people who've gone too far and now just want to come home. Rose swallowed hard, voice steady but soft. "You've changed. And you haven't." He smiled faintly. "Still, the woman who can stop a room just by looking up." She gave a quiet, bitter laugh. "This time, the room stopped because I couldn't decide whether to stay or walk away." For a long moment, Chris said nothing. The clinking of glasses filled the space, then faded. His voice dropped low. "I didn't come here to hurt you again, Rose. I just didn't expect to find you." She looked up, eyes sharp. "You left, Chris, without a word. You chose work. You chose your world. There's nothing left for you to say." He studied her, eyes softening. "I once thought I was right that success would fill the emptiness love left behind. But for 8 years, I only remembered your face every time I saw someone laugh. And the last white roses I gave you never withered in my memory." The words caught in her throat. She remembered the last time he'd brought flowers the night they fought about his move to Singapore. She'd thrown them to the floor, saying she didn't need promises. And now, those same flowers lay between them again, ghosts resurrected. She touched the bouquet gently. "Why white roses?" His voice deepened. "Because they were the first flowers you taught me to love. You said, when you give white roses, it means your heart is pure enough to forgive." She looked at him, the face she'd once loved, once cried over, now softening her heart again. But reason pulled her back. "I didn't come here to go back, Chris." "Neither did I," he smiled slightly. "I came to find out if you still believe in love after all these years." Rose stayed silent. Outside, headlights reflected off the glass, streaking like slow rain. She heard Ruby's voice again. "If you don't try, how will you know what could happen?" Their eyes met, full of pain, fear, and something alive. Hope. Then her phone buzzed. A message from Ruby. "Mommy, I'm coming to you. Mrs. Patterson's asleep, but I'll walk carefully. Promise." Rose went pale. "Oh my God." Chris straightened. "What's wrong?" She stood up, trembling. "Ruby, she's coming here. Alone." Chris looked stunned. "Ruby? Your daughter?" Rose nodded, heart pounding. "Yes, she's 7. He froze for a moment, then spoke slowly, almost whispering. "Ruby Leslie, right?" Her eyes widened. "You know her name?" Chris swallowed, gripping the flowers tighter. "I've seen a little girl named Ruby. She passes by Brown Tech every afternoon, carries a cat umbrella, green eyes, curly hair, loves reading in the rain." Rose felt her breath catch. "No, it can't be." He went on, voice trembling. I used to leave a white rose on the steps sometimes. She reminded me of someone. She always said thank you, bowed her head politely. Tell me, Rose, was that? Rose whispered. Yes, that was my daughter. And as they stood there, the scattered pieces finally fell into place. Outside, the night wind swept through the street. The bell above the diner door jingled softly. Someone had just walked in. A small, familiar voice spoke, innocent and clear. Excuse me, have you seen my mummy? Rose turned and there was Ruby, in her pink coat, curls damp with fog, breath puffing little clouds of white. Chris looked at Ruby. Ruby looked at Chris. Two pairs of green eyes met, and time stood still. In that moment, Rossetti seemed to stop breathing. Ruby stood at the door, her wide eyes glimmering like two emeralds under the amber light. She took a deep breath, glanced around, and smiled when she saw Rose standing beside a man she didn't know. Mommy. Her voice, clear and bright, turned heads from nearby tables. Rose rushed forward, heart pounding. She knelt, clutching her daughter's hands. Ruby, what are you doing here? You walked? It's freezing, why would you go out alone? Ruby hunched her shoulders, her tone a little sheepish. I brought the whistle and emergency money like you taught me. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. Rose gripped the tiny hand tighter, torn between scolding and crying. Before she could say another word, Ruby lifted her gaze, and those green eyes, identical to Chris's, locked onto the man standing frozen behind them. Hello, Mr. Brown, she said softly, calm but remarkably sure. Chris stiffened. You? Know me? Ruby nodded. I walk past your building every day. You're giving me flowers and books, aren't you? The air in the restaurant seemed to shrink. Rose went utterly still, and Chris could only stare at the little girl, her face, her eyes, the curve of her smile, every detail achingly familiar. He nodded slowly, his voice rough. I didn't think you'd remember. I remember everything, Ruby said with quiet pride. You're supposed to remember good people. I kept your flowers, pressed them in a book so I wouldn't forget. Rose swallowed hard, forcing her voice steady. Ruby, thank the nice man, and then we'll go home, okay? But Ruby didn't move. She tilted her head, eyes bright with sudden realization. Mommy, her voice trembled. This man, he has eyes like mine. The words fell between them like the soft shatter of glass. Chris went numb. He looked at Ruby, then at Rose, her lips trembling, unable to speak, and slowly, awareness seeped into him, heartbeat by heartbeat. Those eyes, that green flecked with gold, the way Ruby bit her lip when surprised, the proud, tilted stance, fragile but fierce. He didn't need a test, no proof. His heart already knew. Rose, his voice broke. This little girl, she's... Let's go home, Ruby. Rose cut him off, clutching her daughter's hand, her voice urgent. But Ruby didn't look away. Mr. Brown, do you like white roses too? Chris drew a long breath, then knelt so his eyes met hers. Yes, he said gently. White roses help people remember something beautiful, even after it's gone. Ruby studied his face, as if she could read what his heart was saying. Then who do you remember? He softly answered, someone who once taught me to believe in love. Rose stood motionless, her pulse racing. The moment between them felt unreal, past and present folding into one. A father who didn't yet know, and a child who didn't yet understand that fate had just brought them together. Ruby smiled then, pure and radiant, lighting the whole room. She must have been exceptional. Chris replied, his gaze never leaving Rose. She was. She still is. Rose turned away, blinking back tears. She tugged Ruby's hand gently. We need to go, sweetheart. It's late. Ruby nodded, but before leaving, she looked at Chris one last time, her eyes deep and steady, as if trying to memorize something her heart would need later. Goodbye, Mr. Brown. Chris's voice was soft. Goodbye, Ruby. And as mother and daughter stepped out into the night, he remained seated, staring through the glass as their figures disappeared into the cold Atlanta wind. The bouquet of white roses still lay on the table, between two half-empty glasses, silent witnesses to a secret awakened after 8 years. That night, Rose couldn't sleep. The old clock in the living room ticked, dry and relentless. Ruby slept soundly, curled beneath her blanket, her breathing even, her lashes long against her cheeks. Rose sat by the window, staring out at the street. The streetlights blurred against the glass, shimmering like unshed tears. She didn't know whether to be afraid or grateful. To see Chris again, the man she had loved, lost, forgiven, and forgotten, only to find he was the child's father who had never known him. Memories returned. Mornings when he rose early to brew coffee and kiss her cheek before work. Nights when they argued about money, the future, and things that should never have been worth losing each other over. And the day he walked out, leaving behind a signed contract for Singapore, no promise to return. Rose had given birth to Ruby alone, in a rented apartment. When she first heard her daughter cry, she had whispered to herself, "I don't need anyone else, just her." But now, the man she thought gone forever had reappeared with white roses and the same eyes that could still undo her. Rose touched the bracelet Ruby had made, still hanging at her neck. She whispered, "Sweetheart, I'm scared. Scared you'll want a father. Scared the past will hurt the life we've built." Rain began to fall outside, soft, like the city's sigh. Across town, Chris couldn't sleep either. He stood in his sleek Buckhead apartment, glass walls opening onto a skyline of glittering artificial stars. But to him, the lights were hollow. On his desk lay the bouquet from earlier. Beside it, a leather notebook where he recorded things that mattered, though tonight he wrote only one line. "Her name is Ruby. She has my eyes." He closed the book and leaned back, remembering when she smiled and said, "Mr. Brown." A strange ache filled him, painful yet somehow miraculous. He had built an empire for 8 years, earning the title the media gave him, the billionaire who never smiles. But tonight, he realized his smile had returned, reflected in a child's eyes. And the name Ruby, a gemstone, was, in truth, the most precious thing life had ever hidden from him. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number, no name attached. "She's our daughter. But please, don't come looking for us." Chris sat motionless. The fortress around his heart began to crumble, brick by brick. He opened his laptop and replayed security footage from the cameras outside Brown Tech. Every afternoon at 4:15, she was the little girl with curly hair and a pink coat, pausing to pick up a flower. He watched frame after frame, her smile, her spin, her polite little bow, each one cut deeper than the last. For the first time in years, Chris wept, not for loss but for the fragile miracle of finding what he hadn't even known he'd lost. He turned toward the rain-smeared window, his voice low, almost a vow. "I won't let you run anymore, Rose. Not this time." And across the city, Rose sat by Ruby's bed, gently stroking her daughter's hair. Ruby smiled in her sleep, whispering words that caught in Rose's throat. "Daddy, thank you for the flowers." And Rose knew then some ties of fate can never be severed, no matter how far we run. The next morning, Atlanta lay under a veil of mist. Rose drove to work, her mind heavy, as if the night before had been a strange dream that blurred joy, fear, and something she didn't dare to name. Since she'd seen Chris again, her world had lost its fragile order. She thought she'd mastered peace, the rhythm of work, picking Ruby up from school, reading her stories before bed, and sitting quietly by the window, listening to traffic hum through the city. But one look from that man, and all that peace dissolved like smoke. In the small logistics office, the morning buzzed with printers, ringing phones, and clattering keyboards. Maya, her colleague and the one who'd arranged the $50 date, walked over, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. "Tell me everything," she said, eyes gleaming. "How was the date? Dinner? Goodbye? Kiss? Any spark?" Rose gave a weary smile. There was a spark that could burn down both the past and the present. Maya blinked. "What does that even mean?" Rose hesitated before whispering, "My date was Chris." The air between them froze. Maya nearly dropped her cup. "Chris? Chris who?" "Chris Brown. My ex-husband." Maya exhaled slowly. "Oh, damn. The universe really does have a dark sense of humor." Rose leaned back in her chair, staring at the weak sunlight pushing through the fog. "You're right. Only the universe could be that cruel." Maya softened her tone. "And Ruby? Are you going to tell him?" Rose shook her head almost instantly. "No. He has his own world now, money, headlines, investors, galas. He doesn't need to know about a 7-year-old girl born in the silence he left behind. But she's his daughter, Maya said quietly. Rose gave a bitter smile. She's mine. I raised her, loved her, and protected her. Chris wasn't there when I went into labor, or when Ruby had a fever at 2 a.m., or when I carried her to daycare before work. He lost the right to know. Maya opened her mouth but said nothing. Rose's steady gaze silenced her. The ticking clock filled the space between them, counting to something neither could avoid. That afternoon, as Rose packed up her desk, her phone buzzed. An unknown number, but beneath it, the words, Browntech HQ. Her heart clenched. She hesitated, then answered. Hello? Chris's voice came through low, calm, too calm. I'm not calling to upset you. I just can't stop thinking about Ruby. Rose closed her eyes. Chris, I told you not to call. I know, but you have to understand, when I saw her, something in me changed. She looks so much like me, Rose. Not just her eyes, her smile, the way she talks. Don't, Rose whispered, almost pleading. You don't understand. Ruby has a peaceful life, and I don't want that shaken. I only want to see her once, properly, not as a stranger. No. Her voice was firm, sharp. You can't. There was silence. Then his tone softened, trembling slightly. I won't do anything you don't want. But tell me one thing, is she happy? Rose's throat tightened. Tears slid down her neck, hot and helpless. She was, until you came back. She hung up. Moments later, the phone buzzed again. A message. I won't come if you forbid it. But if fate brought us here again, I won't run anymore. See. Rose gripped the phone. Fear tangled with something she refused to name hope, and she hated herself for it. When she arrived at Ruby's school that evening, she saw her daughter holding a single white flower by the fence. Her heart stopped. Ruby, where did you get that? Ruby smiled and pointed toward the main road, where the Browntech building loomed. From my old friend, Mr. Brown. He left it by the gate again. A chill ran through Rose's body. You talked to him? Ruby nodded cheerfully. He asked if I had a good day and said, every day is worth smiling about. He talks just like you, Mommy. Rose froze, forcing a weak smile. I guess he's a nice man then. Ruby tilted her head, thoughtful. I think he's more than nice. He feels like someone you used to know. The innocent remark cut through Rose like glass. She bent down and kissed Ruby's forehead. Let's go home, sweetheart. It's going to rain. The ride home was quiet. Ruby hummed softly, the white flower in her hands, and Rose knew the truth was crawling out of the dark, no matter how fast she tried to outrun it. That night, Chris stayed late at the office. On his monitor, paused on the screen, was the image of a little girl holding a white flower outside his building. He'd watched it countless times. Each time, he noticed something new, how she bowed her head, tilted her shoulders, bit her lip when shy, every piece of her. A reflection of Rose. But he couldn't stop thinking about the name stitched on her backpack. R. Leslie. He typed Rose Leslie Brown into Google for the first time in 8 years. Dozens of old articles appeared, wedding photos, a short piece about their quiet divorce, and a grainy photo of Rose at a Christmas service, holding a toddler in her arms. The caption read, Rose Leslie, single mom, works at Atlanta Logistics. Chris leaned back in his chair, guilt rising thick as fog. 8 years. He had lost 8 years. He remembered their last fight, how Rose had said, one day, you'll realize some things can't be bought. But by then, it'll be too late. And she had been right. He started typing a message but deleted it. No apology could reach that far back. Instead, he opened his notebook and wrote, if she won't let me see her, I'll wait. But Ruby deserves the truth, and I won't walk away again. Across the city, Ruby was still awake. She lay in bed, opening her flower book. Inside, each delicate white bloom had been pressed flat, preserved perfectly. On the first page, she'd written in pencil, from Mr. Brown, the man with kind eyes. She whispered to herself, Mommy says not to trust strangers. But Mr. Brown isn't a stranger anymore. He's known me for a long time. Then she smiled, adding another line. Maybe he knows Mommy, too. Rose stood frozen outside her door, listening to every word and breath, and for the first time in years, she felt pure fear not of the past, but of what the truth might do when it finally arrived. Because she knew Chris wouldn't stop. He never had, not when he wanted something with his whole heart. The next morning, as Rose walked Ruby to school, she saw a black SUV parked at the end of the street. The windows were tinted, impossible to see through, but something in her gut twisted. She gripped Ruby's hand tighter. "Come on, sweetheart, let's hurry." When they turned the corner toward the gate, the car pulled away. But that afternoon, when Rose returned to pick Ruby up, her heart stopped. There he was, Chris, crouched beside Ruby at the school gate, a grey coat draped over his shoulders. He was handing her a hardcover children's book. Whatever he said made Ruby laugh out loud. The world seemed impossibly still for a moment, her daughter's laughter, his gentle gaze, glowing in the soft light. They looked like they belonged to each other. Rose's voice cracked as she called out, "Ruby." Ruby turned, grinning. "Mommy, look, it's Mr. Brown again." Chris rose to his full height, meeting Rose's eyes. Neither spoke. The autumn wind swept between them, rustling the dry leaves. Finally, Chris broke the silence. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. I just wanted to give Ruby the book she loved." Rose glanced down The Little Prince. Her chest tightened. That had once been their book, the one they'd read together every night. She took a breath. "You shouldn't be here, Chris." He nodded. "I know. But if I hadn't come, would you have ever told me?" She couldn't answer. The question cut deeper than blame. Chris's eyes softened, steady. "I don't want to take your peace, Rose. I need to know. Is she mine?" Rose's voice trembled. "Ruby doesn't need a father. She has me. But you can't erase the part of me that's in her blood." She turned away, tears falling freely now. "You don't understand. You'll ruin everything. Ruby's happy in her own way. Don't make it harder." Chris stepped closer, his voice breaking. "Rose, don't lie. She has my eyes. I already know." The air froze around them. Ruby looked up between them, confused, her voice soft and frightened. "Mommy, why are you crying?" Rose knelt, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead, gripping her hand tightly. "Because I'm afraid of losing you, Ruby." Chris watched as they walked away, the ache in his chest almost unbearable. He knew the door wasn't closed, not yet, but if he wanted to cross it, he'd have to do it with truth, and nothing less. That night, the apartment felt unusually still. Ruby sat on the sofa, her small legs swinging as she read The Little Prince, the book Chris had given her. She smiled each time she turned a page, like greeting an old friend. Rose sat a few steps away, her eyes fixed on her daughter. She wanted to be angry, to take that book away, but she couldn't, because every time Ruby smiled, her own heart softened. "Mommy," Ruby said, looking up, "Mr. Brown told me the Little Prince went looking for love even though he might get hurt. Do you think grown-ups should do that too?" Rose froze. That question, from a 7-year-old, cut deeper than she expected. "Where did you hear that?" Ruby blinked. "He said it. He told me, if you don't go searching, you'll only ever see the desert." Rose gave a sad smile. "Sometimes grown-ups get tired, Ruby. They're afraid of getting lost again." Ruby thought briefly, then said softly, "I think he's afraid, too, just like you. You two are kind of the same." Rose didn't answer. She stood and walked to the kitchen, pretending to tidy up anything to hide the tears stinging her eyes. Since Chris had returned, her heart had become chaos again, a clock running but no longer keeping time. She'd once believed time could erase him, that love would fade like old paint on the wall. But time doesn't erase, it only covers things with dust, and when someone brushes it away, everything returns, sharp and clear. Across town, Chris was still awake. He sat in his office, a desk lamp spilling gold light over an old photograph, one he'd found in the divorce papers his lawyer still kept. Rose stood by a window, her hand resting on her pregnant belly, smiling faintly, eyes distant. He had never seen the photo before, and looking at it now, he finally understood why his heart had never been at peace. He picked up his phone, typed, deleted, typed again. He'd done that hundreds of times in the past few days. So much he wanted to say, yet no words were enough. Finally, he wrote just one line. "Tomorrow I'll come to tell the truth. Even if you don't want to hear it, Ruby deserves to know her father." He hit send, then sat quietly, listening to the rain tapping against the window, slow, steady, like the heartbeat of a man learning how to love again. The next morning, Rose woke early. She planned to take Ruby to school, then head straight to work. But when she opened the door, she froze. Chris was standing on the porch. He wasn't in a suit, just a grey sweater, looking tired, his eyes bright despite the exhaustion. In his hands was a bouquet of white roses, damp with dew. Rose moved to close the door, but Ruby ran up behind her, exclaiming, "Mr. Brown, you're here." Chris crouched, smiling a smile Rose hadn't seen in years. It was warm, genuine, stripped of all the arrogance he once wore. "Good morning, Ruby. Are those flowers for Mommy?" He nodded gently. "Yes. But I came to say something even more important." Ruby tilted her head. "What is it?" Rose stepped between them. "Ruby, go inside, sweetheart. Mommy needs to talk to Mr. Brown." Ruby hesitated, eyes darting between them, then nodded and ran in, clutching the little prince. When the door closed, Rose spoke, her voice tired. "You shouldn't have come. I couldn't stay away," Chris replied quietly. "Rose, knowing I have a daughter and doing nothing, it's unbearable." Rose shut her eyes, tears already gathering. "You think showing up now fixes everything? Where were you during those years? When I was alone, Ruby was sick, and I couldn't pay the bills. Where were you, Chris?" "I didn't know, Rose," he said, voice breaking. "I didn't know you were pregnant, because you left before I could tell you." Silence. The wind carried the scent of rain and roses. Chris stepped closer. "Let me make it right. I'm not asking for forgiveness, only to be part of her life, even just a small part." Rose's eyes filled again. "You don't understand. Ruby is my whole world. I'm afraid it will fall apart if you come into it." Chris's voice softened. "Or maybe it will finally be complete." That made her pause. "I know I hurt you," he continued, "but when I look at Ruby, I see everything I lost and everything I want to save. You can hate me, Rose, but don't let her grow up thinking she doesn't deserve a father." Rose turned away. "I need time. I'll wait," he said. He handed her the bouquet. "Because once, a girl I loved told me that white roses mean a heart still pure enough to forgive." She took them, saying nothing. As Chris stepped down from the porch, Ruby's voice rang from inside. "Mommy, is he done talking? Can I say goodbye?" Rose's voice broke. "Go, Chris, before she knows." He stopped at the last step and looked back, his green eyes glowing in the morning sunday. "She already knows. Rose, don't you see? She looks at me like she's been waiting her whole life." Then he walked away, leaving her with the roses' dew dripping from their petals like tears. That afternoon, Rose picked Ruby up from school later than usual. The girl sat quietly in the back seat, not reading, not humming. "Are you tired, honey?" Rose asked. Ruby shook her head. "Just thinking." "About what?" Ruby stared out the window. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Mr. Brown. I know why he likes me." Rose's chest tightened. "Why's that?" "Because I look like him." Ruby turned, her green eyes wide. "Mommy, I have his eyes, don't I?" Rose bit her lip, gripping the steering wheel. "Who told you that?" "No one. I just saw it. When he smiles, it feels like looking in a mirror." Rose couldn't speak. Then Ruby asked, softly but seriously, "Mommy, can I ask you something?" "Yes, sweetheart. If I had a dad I never met, would you tell me?" The question hit her like a jolt. She had to take a deep breath to steady her voice. "Ruby, why are you asking that?" "Because I dreamed about him," Ruby whispered. "He was standing in the rain, holding white roses, and he said, 'Daddy's here.'" Rose couldn't answer. Her tears came hot and fast. Ruby reached out and held her hand. "Don't cry, Mommy. I'm not mad. I want to know if dreams can come true." When they got home, Rose pulled her daughter into a tight embrace. "You're all I need, Ruby, no matter what happens." Ruby nodded, but in her clear green eyes, Rose saw something she couldn't stop: faith. Faith that the world she knew was about to change. That night, Chris came late. He knocked 3 times before Rose opened the door. Her face still held traces of tears. "I'm not here to fight," he said softly. "Just to talk." She didn't respond, but she didn't close the door either. Chris stepped in. Ruby sat on the sofa, clutching her teddy bear, looking at him with wonder and familiarity. "Hi, Ruby." "Hi, Mr. Brown." Silence filled the room, heavy but gentle. Chris knelt. "Ruby, do you believe in miracles?" Ruby nodded. "Yes. Mommy says I'm her miracle." Chris smiled, eyes glistening. "She's right. And you're mine, too." Ruby blinked. "What do you mean?" He looked at Rose, asking for silent permission, then turned back to Ruby and spoke slowly. "Because I'm your father." For a few seconds, the world stopped. Rose's hands trembled. Tears spilled over. Ruby looked at him, stunned, then whispered, "I already knew." Chris's breath caught. "You did?" She nodded. "Only a dad looks at me like that. Like I'm the best thing he's ever seen." Chris laughed through his tears and opened his arms. Ruby ran to him, wrapping her tiny arms around his neck. Rose stood there watching, her heart breaking and healing all at once. Chris looked up, voice trembling. "I promise, Rose. No matter what happens, I'm not leaving again." She turned away, whispering, "You said that 8 years ago." "This time," he said, pressing a hand to his chest, "it's not a promise, it's a father's truth." And for the first time in 8 years, Rose didn't hold back her tears, because in Chris's eyes, she saw what she thought she'd lost forever: faith. The first winter rain fell without pause. Atlanta's sky hung heavy and grey, the streetlights bleeding pale gold into the puddles. In the parking lot outside her apartment, Rose held Ruby close, shielding her daughter's head with a thin coat. Behind her came hurried footsteps, Chris's voice cutting through the rain. "Rose, wait." She didn't stop. The rain clung to her dress, heavy as the fear pressing on her chest. "Rose, please don't walk away like this." His voice cracked, half lost in the downpour. She turned, eyes flashing with anger and hurt. "What more do you want, Chris? You already know the truth. Isn't that enough?" He stood a few feet away, breath ragged, hair dripping. "I can't just know and walk away. You want me to pretend Ruby doesn't exist? That she's not mine?" "Ruby doesn't need you," Rose cried, voice breaking. "She already has everything: love, peace, a life without broken promises or tears." Chris's fists clenched. "But she deserves a father, Rose. I can't change the past, but I can do something now." "The present?" Rose gave a hollow laugh, tears blending with the rain. "Do you know how many years it took me to heal? How many times had I had to lie to her, telling Ruby her father was a good man, just away because of work? I built a perfect little story so she wouldn't hate you. And now you want to smash it?" Chris stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "I don't want to destroy what you built. I just want to be part of it, to be real, not a ghost in our daughter's imagination." Rose shook her head, trembling. "You think it's that simple? A child doesn't just need a father there, she needs a heart that stays. You don't know what that takes." Chris fell silent. Rain streaked his face, mixing with tears he didn't bother to hide. "I do know," he whispered, "because I grew up without one." Rose froze. "I swore," Chris continued, voice cracking, "that if I ever had a child, I'd never let them wonder, 'Where's Dad?' I broke that promise once. I won't break it again." Something inside her softened, just a flicker. Between them, Ruby looked up, her small face wet, her voice trembling. "Mommy, why is everyone so afraid to tell the truth?" Both turned to her. Ruby blinked through the rain, her tone innocent but aching. "If he's my daddy, I'd be happy. I'm not mad." Rose knelt, pulling her close. "Ruby, I just wanted to protect you." Ruby's voice shook. "But Mommy, I don't need protection from my own dad." Chris's chest ached at the sight of them. He stepped forward, kneeling beside the Rose. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "Don't," she whispered, her voice breaking into the storm. He placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. "I was wrong. Wrong to leave, wrong to stay away. But I'm here now. I won't leave either of you again." She didn't push him away. Rain drummed on the car roof steady, rhythmic like 3 hearts beating together, fragile and uncertain. Ruby looked between them, eyes shining. So, are we a family now? Chris swallowed hard, nodding. If you want us to be, Ruby. I do. Her smile glowed like a light in the dark. Rose looked from her daughter to the man beside her, her heart twisting painfully. Maybe, she thought, sometimes you must lose almost everything to understand that love isn't about holding on, it's about forgiving. They sat together in the car, hiding from the rain. No one spoke. Only the sound of raindrops and their quiet breaths filled the small space. Ruby leaned against Chris's shoulder, yawning. Daddy, I'm sleepy. Chris looked at Rose, waiting for her permission. She sighed, whispering, I don't know what tomorrow will bring, Chris. But tonight, let her rest. He nodded. Thank you. As Ruby drifted to sleep against his arm, Chris brushed her curls gently, his voice thick with emotion. I missed 8 years. I'll spend the rest of my life making them up to her. Rose said nothing, but in her eyes, the rain seemed to fall more slowly. When the storm finally eased, the parking lot lay still, raindrops sliding from the roof like tears. Rose stepped out, inhaling the cold scent of wet earth. Ruby slept soundly, head on Chris's shoulder. The sight of them together stole her breath. She's beautiful when she sleeps, Chris murmured. Rose nodded faintly. She's been through more than you think. She's asked me about you hundreds of times. Every time, I lied. Chris's voice softened, full of regret. I'm sorry I made you carry that alone. Rose smiled sadly. There were days I thought I was fine, that Ruby was enough. But when you came back, I realized. Some emptiness can only be filled by the one who caused it. Chris said nothing. Her words cut him open but made him feel alive again. Rose, he whispered, I don't expect forgiveness. I want to be here, not to take you back, but to let Ruby grow up, knowing her father loved her mother deeply. Rose's eyes glistened. You think love can fix everything? No, Chris said, but it can start over. She studied him for a long time, weighing the truth in his eyes. Then she whispered, if I let you into Ruby's life, you have to promise no matter what happens you'll never leave again. Chris clasped her hand. I promise. From the back seat, Ruby stirred, mumbling sleepily, Mommy, Daddy, don't cry anymore, okay? They looked at each other and both laughed through their tears. In the days that followed, Chris began to appear more often, first to pick Ruby up from school, then for dinners, bedtime stories, and math lessons. The small neighborhood soon got used to seeing a tall man in rolled-up sleeves sitting on the porch, sketching beside a curly-haired girl. Mrs. Chen would smile as she passed by. I told you, she said. Some people can travel the whole world and still find their way back home. Rose only smiled, saying nothing. But inside, she'd started to believe it. One afternoon, as Chris played with Ruby at the park, Rose sat in the car, watching through the window. He carried her on his shoulders. She laughed, arms stretched wide like wings. The sunset burned gold over their hair, and Rose realized maybe miracles still existed, but only for those brave enough to believe again. That night, after Ruby fell asleep, Chris stayed behind to help wash the dishes. The soft kitchen light spilled over their hands as they brushed against each other over a porcelain plate. Just a second, but Rose felt her heart tremble. Chris said quietly, I don't want to pressure you, Rose, but if I could, I'd move you both out of here to my home in Buckhead. It's safer, better for Ruby. Rose looked up and shook her head gently. She doesn't need a big house. She needs time. And you? He asked. I need time too. Chris nodded, smiling faintly. Some things can't be rushed. He dried his hands and turned to leave. But before he reached the door, a small voice called out, Daddy. Ruby stood there in her pajamas, hair tousled, eyes half asleep. Chris knelt. Why aren't you in bed, sweetheart? She wrapped her arms around his neck. I just wanted to say good night to my real daddy. He held her tightly, voice trembling. Good night, my little star. When he finally left, Rose stood on the porch, watching him go. The rain had stopped completely. Above them, a few faint stars shimmered through the clouds, and she knew nothing would ever be the same again. Not because the past had returned, but because her heart had finally stopped being afraid. December wrapped Atlanta in a cold, silvery hush. Christmas lights strung across the streets shimmered faintly, but in Rose's small apartment, their glow couldn't reach the quiet ache filling every corner. On the table stood a small tree Ruby had decorated with faded paper ornaments and a few old plastic baubles. The little girl sat silently, turning in her hands a white paper rose Chris had taught her to fold. No laughter, no carols hummed under her breath. Rose watched her daughter, heart tightening. For the past week, Ruby had been different, quieter, withdrawn, as if some small light inside her had gone out. That evening, Rose decided to bake cookies. "Remember how much you love gingerbread," she said, sounding cheerful. "Christmas isn't Christmas without cookies, right?" Ruby nodded softly. "Yes, Mom," just that no smile. Rose tied her apron and began kneading dough. "Hey, do you remember the first time I baked? We burned the whole tray and had to dunk them in milk to save them." Ruby didn't answer. Her eyes stayed on the floor. Rose stopped, crouching beside her. "Sweetheart, what's wrong? Did someone bother you at school?" Ruby shook her head. "No." "Then why are you sad?" After a long pause, Ruby whispered, "Because I don't understand. If Mommy and Daddy love each other, why don't we live together?" The question struck like a thin, sharp blade straight through Rose's chest. "Ruby," the girl looked up, her green eyes glimmering. "I see how Daddy looks at you like in the movies, the look of someone in love. But why do you keep looking away?" Rose took her small hand, searching for words. "Honey, grown-ups are more complicated than you think." Ruby sighed. "That's what you always say. But I think it's simple. If people love each other, they stay. If they're scared, they lose each other." Rose said nothing. Her daughter's truth was too pure, too sharp. She pulled Ruby into her arms, kissing her hair. "I'm sorry, sweetheart." Ruby whispered, "You don't have to be sorry. I want a Christmas like in the pictures, 3 people, 1 tree, and real smiles." Rose couldn't answer. She turned to the window, where artificial snow drifted from the shopping plaza lights. She missed Chris the way he smiled when Ruby misread a word, the steady warmth of his hand on her back in a crowd, the quiet nights they read The Little Prince together. But she also remembered the arguments, the tears, the hollow ache of being left behind. She was afraid, and that fear was slowly stealing her daughter's joy. Later that night, after Ruby had fallen asleep, Rose sat by the window, phone in hand. She opened a message from Chris, which had been unread for 2 days. "I know you need time, but I'd like to spend this Christmas with Ruby, just the 3 of us. No pressure, no questions. I promise." She read it over and over, then set the phone down. She didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to say yes for Ruby, for that flicker of light in her child's eyes. But another part, the one that remembered loss, held her back. She whispered into the quiet, "I'm scared, Chris, scared to believe, and lose again." Outside, the wind sighed through the window cracks, carrying faint carols from the nearby church. Silent night, holy night. Rose closed her eyes. She saw Ruby's smiling face in the darkness, holding a white rose. That was the smile she couldn't bear to lose. Christmas morning came colder than usual. No real snow, just a biting wind. Rose woke early, hung extra ribbons on the small tree, and prepared breakfast. Ruby still slept, her face calm, lashes fluttering as if she were dreaming something lovely. Rose whispered, "Your mommy's miracle." Then the phone rang. "Chris." She hesitated, then answered, "Merry Christmas, Rose." His voice was low, gentle. She could hear his breath. "I don't want to intrude. I just wanted to wish you both a happy day." "Thank you," Rose said, her voice trembling. After a pause, he added, "I bought something small for Ruby. Can I leave it at your door?" Rose was silent, then softly said, "Okay." When she opened the door an hour later, a silver-wrapped box sat on the step, tied with a white ribbon. The tag read, "For Ruby, who taught me how to love again. From Daddy." Tears blurred Rose's eyes. Ruby woke and ran out, squealing, "Christmas gift." Inside the box was a new leather-bound journal, her name embossed in gold, Ruby Leslie Brown. Ruby gasped. "Mommy, Santa even knows my full name." Rose laughed through her tears. "Of course he does, sweetheart. Hugging the book, Ruby whispered. I want to write a thank you. To Santa? Rose asked. To Daddy. I want to tell him I'm not mad anymore. Rose blinked. Mad? About what? Ruby gazed out the window, where misty rain floated like smoke. Last Christmas, I prayed for Daddy to come home. He didn't. I thought maybe my prayer wasn't strong enough. Rose held her tightly. No, sweetheart. It's just that sometimes miracles take a little longer to arrive. That afternoon, another message came from Chris. I'm at Street Mary's. There's a charity event for the children here. If you two can, come. Not for me, for Ruby's smile. Rose's hands trembled as she read. Just then, Ruby ran in, excited. Mommy, I heard Santa's going to be at Street Mary's. Can we go, please? Rose couldn't say no. She nodded. Okay, let's go. When they arrived, the hospital glowed with lights. Volunteers handed out gifts, children laughed, and the air smelled of cocoa and hope. Ruby ran around, laughter returning at last. At the end of the hall stood Chris in a red sweater, holding a sack of presents. When he saw them, he stopped. His smile was genuine, warm, and touched with wonder. Ruby sprinted toward him. Daddy! He lifted her high, spinning her once. Merry Christmas, my little princess. Rose watched, her heart softening like snow melting in sunlight. Together, they handed out gifts, their laughter echoing through the hall. Rose felt like she was dreaming for a fleeting moment. 3 people, 1 family, wrapped in Christmas magic. But joy didn't last long. When the event ended, Ruby sat down, her face pale. Mommy, she whispered, I feel dizzy. Rose knelt beside her, panic rising. Ruby, what's wrong? The girl clutched her chest. My heart's beating too fast. Chris scooped her up instantly, voice shaking. Get a doctor, now. Medical staff rushed over. Ruby was placed on a gurney and wheeled toward the ER. Rose stood frozen, trembling, tears streaming down her face. Chris caught her hand. I'm here, I promise. But Rose couldn't speak. She could only run after the gurney, its wheels echoing down the sterile hallway. Behind those white doors, the sound of Christmas faded, and for the first time in 8 years, Rose prayed not for love, not for forgiveness, but for her daughter's tiny heart to keep beating just once more. The alarm ripped through the hospital corridor, shrill, sharp, like a blade slicing through a mother's chest. Rose nearly collapsed as the ER doors slammed shut in her face. Please wait outside, a nurse ordered, her voice firm but kind. That's my daughter, Rose screamed, pounding on the glass. Chris caught her by the shoulders, though his own hands were trembling. Rose, listen, they're doing everything they can. She shoved him away, her sobs raw. You say that, but her heart is stopping, Chris. Do you hear me? Inside, the doctors shouted over the chaos. Clear. 3, 2, 1. Shock. Ruby's small body jolted, then fell limp again. A suffocating silence followed, broken only by the slow, fading beep, beep of the monitor. Rose buried her face in her hands and whispered through shaking lips, Please, God, don't take her from me. Chris turned aside, fists clenched so tight his knuckles went white. A single tear, something he'd forgotten how to shed, fell onto the cold tile floor. 20 minutes crawled by like 20 years. And then, beep, 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 the steady rhythm returned. The doors burst open. Dr. Chen emerged, sweat glistening on his brow, but relief softening his voice. She's stable for now. We've managed to regulate her heartbeat, but she needs close monitoring. It was a cardiac arrhythmia triggered by extreme emotional stress. Rose crumpled against Chris, sobbing into his chest. Thank you, God. But, Dr. Chen continued gently, if her emotional state doesn't improve, it could happen again. Ruby is highly sensitive. She's been carrying more emotional weight than a child her age should. Her recovery isn't just about medicine, but love and peace. Rose nodded, too choked to speak. Chris placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. We'll make sure it doesn't happen again. The doctor looked between them, his voice calm but pointed. She doesn't just need her parents in the same room. She needs them beating to the same rhythm. When they were finally allowed inside, Ruby lay still among the wires and tubes, her face pale but peaceful. Her curls fanned across the pillow, lashes fluttering with every fragile breath. Rose sat by her side, clutching the small hand that had once reached for her in sleep. "Mommy's here, Ruby. I'm not going anywhere." Chris stood on the other side, eyes fixed on the monitor. Every number that flickered was a heartbeat of hope, every beep a prayer. Minutes later, Ruby stirred. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Mommy?" "Yes, sweetheart," Rose said through tears. Ruby's eyes drifted toward Chris. "Daddy too." Chris bent close, taking her hand gently. His voice cracked. "Yes, baby. Daddy's here. Did I make you scared?" Rose laughed softly, her tears spilling. "A little bit, yes. But you're okay now, aren't you?" Ruby shook her head weakly. "I'm sorry. I just wanted... You both need to stop being sad." Chris pressed his hand to her forehead, his voice trembling. "No, Ruby, don't say sorry. We're the ones who should be. You don't have to carry our sadness anymore." She smiled faintly. "Then, let's make a promise." "What promise, sweetheart?" Rose asked. "Promise you'll love each other enough, so I don't have to try for both of you." Rose broke down, burying her face in her daughter's tiny hand. Chris kissed Ruby's forehead, whispering, "Daddy promises." Ruby's eyelids fluttered closed, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Then I can sleep now." The room fell quiet, only the rhythmic beeping filled the air, a fragile song of life still holding on. That night, the hospital was hushed. Outside, artificial snow drifted across the plaza lights, melting slowly on the cold glass window. Rose sat slumped beside the bed, fingers entwined, eyes fixed on her daughter's slow, even breathing. Chris draped his coat over her shoulders, then sat across from them, silent. He wanted to speak, but his throat refused him. Finally, he managed 3 small words. "I'm so sorry." Rose looked up, exhaustion clouding her eyes. "You don't have to keep saying that. It's the only thing that makes sense when I see her lying here." She was quiet for a long time, then asked softly, "Are you afraid?" Chris nodded. "More than anything. When the monitor went flat, I thought I'd lost everything." Something shifted in her gaze, something softer. For the first time, she didn't see the unshakable billionaire or the man who'd once left. She saw a father terrified, trembling, human. "Chris," she whispered, "I used to think you only loved with your head. But when I saw you kneel outside that ER, maybe I was wrong." He smiled weakly. "And I used to think love was a luxury until I saw her stop breathing." Silence returned, but it wasn't empty. It pulsed with something fragile, shared. Once broken apart, their hearts now beat in unison, slow, trembling, but together anchored by the tiny life between them. By morning, Ruby stirred again. "Mommy, is it daytime?" her small voice rasped. Rose smiled through her tears. "Yes, sweetheart, the sun's out." Chris stepped closer, carrying a cup of cocoa. "Good news, the doctor says you'll be fine soon." Ruby grinned faintly. "I don't want to go home too soon. Here, I get free cocoa." Both parents laughed, the sound fragile but real. Then Ruby's voice softened. "I think I understand now. My heart got sick because I was worrying too much about you both. But I'm okay now because you're here together." Rose brushed her curls tenderly. "You don't have to worry anymore, baby. Mommy and Daddy will take care of everything." Ruby nodded, eyes already drooping. "Then, I'll nap again, okay?" Chris gently touched her chest, feeling the steady beat beneath. "Sleep, my love. Mommy and Daddy have got this." He looked at Rose, his voice low. "I won't let this heart weaken again." Rose held his gaze, and she believed him for the first time, because sometimes it takes almost losing everything to realize that what matters most isn't the past. It's the choice to stay. Morning sunlight streamed through the hospital window, tinting the white curtains with soft gold. Ruby was still asleep, her face peaceful, an angel finally resting after the storm. Rose sat by the bed, gently brushing her daughter's curls. At the doorway, Chris stood quietly, watching them. A feeling rose in his chest, something too vast, too sacred for words. For 8 years, he hadn't prayed. Not because he didn't believe, but because he didn't think God would listen to a man who once walked away from the people he loved. But that morning, seeing Ruby's small hand tremble in her sleep, he felt the presence of something larger than himself, something that demanded reverence. He left the hospital and walked down a quiet, tree-lined street. St. Mary's Church stood a few blocks away, its wooden doors slightly ajar. The faint scent of incense drifted into the cold air. Chris stepped inside. The silence wrapped around him, broken only by his footsteps across the wooden floor. Sunlight filtered through stained glass, scattering soft rainbows over the pews. He sat in the last row and bowed his head. For the first time in years, there was no phone buzzing, no contracts, no noise, just him and the silence. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "I don't know if you can hear me. I don't know if I even deserve to be heard. But if anyone up there is listening, please, let that little heart keep beating just one more day." He paused, hands trembling. "Because I haven't done enough yet. I haven't taught her to ride a bike. I haven't told her how much I loved her mother. I haven't told her how proud I am to be her father." A single tear slid down his cheek. He couldn't remember the last time he cried, maybe the day Rose left, or the day he signed the deal that made him rich but left him utterly alone. Looking up at the cross, he whispered, "I'm not asking for wealth or second chances. I want to keep one person to love her right now." The church door creaked open behind him. The soft click of heels echoed down the aisle. Rose stepped inside. She stood for a moment, then walked over to his pew. "So this is where you've been," she said gently. Chris turned. His face was still wet with tears. "I didn't know where else to go." She sat beside him in silence. After a moment, she murmured, "I came here too, 8 years ago. When Ruby was born, I prayed she'd grow up healthy. I didn't ask for anything for myself, just for her to live in peace, even without a father." Chris lowered his head. "And I made that prayer only half come true." Rose shook her head. "No, God didn't take the other half away. You just came late." They sat there side by side, not looking at each other, their eyes fixed on the softly glowing altar. Neither spoke, but both felt the weight of tears slipping quietly down their cheeks. Rose broke the silence first, her voice faint. "Do you remember the first time I brought you to church?" Chris smiled wistfully. "You made me kneel and pray, even though I didn't believe. And you said, if God is real, He would have let me meet you sooner. And you answered." She smiled, gaze distant. "I said, maybe He didn't want you to meet me yet, because you weren't ready to keep me." The words landed like a gentle blade, cutting deep. Chris whispered, "I think I'm ready now." Rose turned to him, eyes steady, searching. "Maybe." They sat quietly until the church bells rang, their echoes rippling through the air like a slow heartbeat. Chris closed his eyes and murmured, "Thank you for letting me be here, at least for today." When they returned to the hospital, Ruby was awake, a faint smile on her lips. "Mommy, Daddy, where did you go?" Rose smiled softly. "We went to thank someone for letting you stay with us." Ruby tilted her head. "Who?" Chris brushed her hair. "Someone you call a miracle." The girl grinned. "So the miracle listens to Daddy?" He smiled. "Yes, because Daddy prayed with all his heart." Rose looked at him then, and for the first time in years, her eyes held something he thought was gone forever: faith. They spent the day together, Chris reading stories, Rose peeling fruit, and Ruby giggling between them. For the first time in 8 years, they laughed as one family. No past, no fear, just the present, warm and whole. After Ruby drifted to sleep that night, Rose and Chris sat by the window. Outside, artificial snow drifted down like white petals, glowing under the streetlights. Chris spoke quietly. "You know, when I prayed today, I realized I've never really believed in anything before. Money, success, they all fade. You and she are the only things that still make me want to live." Rose said nothing. The words weren't poetic, but carried the weight of a lost and learned man. Her voice was low, fragile. "You're not going to leave again, are you?" "No," he said firmly. "Even if you push me away, I'll stay. Because I'm not just the man who loves you, I'm Ruby's father, and the one who'll keep both your hearts beating." She studied his face, the same face that once broke her heart and still somehow made it ache. "Do you know," she whispered, I wondered where you were every night for 8 years. But I never imagined you'd be sitting next to me like this in a hospital room, after everything." Chris smiled faintly. "Maybe this is how God teaches love, not with roses, but with tears." Rose bowed her head, her voice trembling. "I'm still scared, Chris. Scared to believe. Scared to lose again." He reached out, holding her hand. "If you ever lose me again, it'll be because I'm gone, not because I walked away." Time seemed to pause. Outside, the wind whispered, and snow fell softly. Inside, two hearts that had wandered for 8 years finally found their way home, not through promises, but through a child's quiet breath and a sleeping smile. Before dawn, Rose woke to a soft sound. Chris was still in the chair beside Ruby's bed, his head bowed, her tiny hand still in his. The golden light of early morning touched his face, tired, gentle, at peace. She smiled faintly and whispered, "Maybe I'm finally brave enough to believe in family." And as the first sunrise of the new year spilled into the room, Rose understood prayer isn't always a plea to God. Sometimes it's your heart's quiet vow when it chooses to stay. Atlanta, December 27. Dear Chris, I'm writing this while Ruby sleeps. The only sound left in the hospital room is the steady rhythm of the monitor, like her little heart whispering to me about how strong life can be. Outside the window, fake snow drifts in the city lights, but inside me, there's a real snow, the kind made of memory, cold and quiet. I don't know if I'll ever send this to you, or if it will stay hidden in the drawer with all the words I never dared to say. But maybe, after everything, I need to write it because sometimes what we don't say is what weighs on us most. Do you remember the first time we met? I was walking in the rain, clutching a stack of files, and you nearly splashed me with your car. You jumped out, awkward and flustered, handing me your handkerchief, and said, "I'm sorry. I've just never met someone who could make the rain stop to stare." I laughed, thinking it was the cheesiest line I'd ever heard. But somehow, when I looked into your eyes, I believed you. You once said the rain made you feel peaceful because it hides what people don't want others to see: tears or fear. Maybe we fell in love that moment in the rain. Two lonely souls finding each other beneath something that blurred what was real and what wasn't. You know, for 8 years, I tried to hate you. I hated how you vanished, left me to face the pain alone. And even hearing your name, Chris Brown, could still make my chest tighten. But underneath all that anger, there was always longing. I missed the way you said my full name, Rose Leslie Brown. I missed your laugh when I talked in my sleep. I missed your hand resting on my belly when Ruby was just a heartbeat inside me. And I've tried to forget, but maybe people only truly forget when their hearts stop beating. I thought I was strong, I could raise a child alone, smile alone, walk through storms alone. But when Ruby lay surrounded by wires and silent monitors, when her heart stopped, I realized I was never strong. I was only living for the part of you that I lost. When you came into that hospital room and held my hand without a word, your eyes said everything. The eyes of a father who'd just found his daughter, and a man who'd once lost the only love of his life. That look made me forgive you, even before I meant to. There's something I've never told you. Ruby knew you were her father before I admitted it to myself. She once said, "I already know. Only a dad looks at me like that." I laughed at her, thinking my 7-year-old was some kind of philosopher, but now I understand. Some truths don't need words. You feel them. And do you know what else? Ruby isn't afraid of dying. Before they wheeled her into surgery, she held my hand and whispered, "Mommy, if I go, don't be sad. Daddy will take care of you for me." I don't know if God ever listened to my prayers, but he heard hers, because he brought you back just when I was about to break. As I write this, I watch her sleep, see you resting beside her, and realize I can't keep running. I can't keep being afraid. I can't let the past dictate what comes next. I've asked myself, if I forgive him, will he leave again? But then I remembered what Dr. Chen said. A heart can't heal if it beats alone. Maybe we're like that, too. So, Chris, if I have enough courage to hand you this letter tomorrow, it will mean I'm ready to love again. Not like before, but like someone who's learned that love doesn't have to be perfect, just real. Rose Leslie. 2 days later, Ruby was discharged. The skies over Atlanta were clear after the rain. sunlight spilling over the bare winter trees. Chris drove slowly, afraid of every bump that might wake Ruby. She hugged her teddy bear in the back seat, humming a late Christmas tune. Rose sat beside him, her hand resting on the folded letter in her coat pocket. She'd read it 3 times, always stopping at the last line. If tomorrow I have enough courage. She didn't know if today was that tomorrow, but when she glanced over and saw Chris smiling at Ruby through the rearview mirror, she knew maybe it was. Chris carried their bags to the apartment that afternoon and stopped at the porch. He didn't step inside. "Do you want me to come in?" he asked quietly. Rose looked at him. "Do you want to?" He smiled, soft and uncertain. "I do, but only if you do." She took the letter from her pocket and placed it in his hand. "I didn't know how to say it out loud," she said, "so I wrote it. But don't read it here. Read it when you're alone." His fingers trembled slightly as he nodded. "Okay, I promise." He bent to kiss Ruby's forehead. "Daddy will come back tonight, okay?" She smiled sleepily. "I believe you, Daddy." Rose stood on the porch when he drove away, watching his figure disappear down the sunlit street. In her pocket lingered the faint woody scent of the coat he'd left behind. That night, Chris sat alone in his penthouse, silent, cold, too large for one man. He poured a glass of whiskey, but didn't drink it. He unfolded the letter. Each word pierced him, painful, healing, necessary. By the time he reached the final line, he stopped, heart pounding. "If I have enough courage to give you this letter tomorrow, it means I'm ready to love again." He set the letter down, grabbed his coat, and left. When Rose opened the door, he stood under the yellow porch light, breath misting in the cold. "You read it?" she asked softly. "I did. And what did you think?" Chris stepped closer, voice rough. "I think today is your tomorrow." Rose smiled, tears glistening. He reached up, brushing one from her cheek. "I'm home, Rose. This time, for good." She didn't speak, just nodded. Their kiss wasn't fierce or desperate, but quiet and whole, 2 people meeting again after a long, unfinished story. Outside, the artificial snow fell gently through the night, melting into their hair like tiny white petals. Inside, Ruby slept soundly, clutching her new leather-bound journal. On the first page, in wobbly letters, she had written, "Dear Daddy, thank you for finding us. March. Atlanta has changed its coat. Spring winds thread through the streets, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth and the tender green of new buds. The sky is clearer now, the sunlight softer and longer, and Rose's white flowers are in full bloom on the small apartment balcony. Ruby calls them the flowers of forgiveness. Every morning, she waters them carefully, sometimes even talking to them in her bright little voice. Hello, flowers. Mommy isn't sad today." From the kitchen, Rose pours coffee, listening to her daughter hum outside. These days, everything feels simple, so peaceful that no one would believe that this family was broken just months ago, each heart covered in quiet wounds. Chris sits on the sofa, his laptop open but forgotten. Instead of looking at figures and contracts, he watches Ruby running around with her tiny watering can. Her laughter glows like March, sunlight pure, golden, and so alive that it makes him believe the world isn't so complicated. When he looks up, his eyes meet Rose's. She's leaning against the doorframe, hair tied loosely, coffee cup in hand, a soft smile on her lips. "You know," she says, her voice light as the breeze, "this is the first time in 8 years I've felt that spring has really come back." Chris smiles, "Because before, you only looked at it through the window. Now you're standing in it." Rose tilts her head, teasing, "You sound like a philosopher." "I learned from Ruby," he says, glancing outside. "She told me the simplest things are the ones that last." They both fall silent, watching Ruby play, letting the scent of white blossoms drift in with the wind fragrance of peace, of beginnings. That afternoon, they went to Piedmont Park. Ruby rides her little bike while Chris walks beside her, and Rose carries an old camera. The park in spring is crowded but calm. Children's laughter blends with birdsong and the smell of new grass, coffee, and wind. Rose takes a photo, Ruby's arms open to the sky, smiling wide, with Chris standing behind her, tall and proud. "This one," Rose says softly, I'll hang it in the living room next to our wedding photo. Chris looks surprised. You still have that? Of course. She smiles faintly. I once thought about burning it, but I couldn't. Maybe deep down, I was waiting for the day I could look at it without pain. He gazes at her, voice warm. And today, no more pain. Rose shakes her head. No, just gratitude. Chris takes her hand. Thank you, Rose, for believing again. She squeezes his fingers gently. Not in you, in us. Ruby runs up, waving her new toy camera. Mommy, Daddy stand together. I want to take a happy family picture. Chris crouches beside her, and Rose places a hand on his shoulder. Ruby counts. 1, 2, 3. Smile. Click. The sound of the shutter floats through the windy afternoon. A new photo slightly tilted, the light imperfect, but real, alive, just like them. Rose opens her laptop in the small apartment that night to scroll through the day's photos. Ruby leans against her shoulder, while Chris brews tea in the kitchen. Mommy, Ruby whispers, we'll still be here tomorrow, right? Rose smiles. Of course. No. I mean, forever. Rose turns, meeting her daughter's bright, serious eyes. Why do you ask, sweetheart? Ruby hesitates, then says, because I'm scared that one day I'll wake up and it'll just be you again. I don't want Daddy to disappear anymore. Chris hears her. He sets the cup down, kneels in front of Ruby, and looks straight into her eyes. Ruby, I promise you'll never wake up without me again, and if you ever do, it's because I'll already be inside your heart. Ruby giggles and hugs him tightly. Daddy, you sound like someone in a movie. He smiles. Maybe, but this isn't a movie. It's real. She nods, then runs off to her room, humming. Chris stands up, glancing at Rose. You know, she says softly. She used to dream of her father every night, a man standing in the rain, holding white flowers, calling her name. Now that dream has come true. Chris nods. And this time, I won't let anyone have to dream anymore. Rose rests her head on his shoulder. Atlanta's beautiful in spring. He smiles. It's most beautiful when you smile. She looks up at him, eyes clear as the sky. Do you think we'll be okay? I don't just think, he says quietly. I know. The next morning, Rose opens the journal Ruby got last Christmas. On the newest page, in wobbly handwriting, it says, Mommy doesn't cry anymore. Daddy doesn't go away. I think the little angel in my heart heard my prayer. Rose closes the book gently, eyes glistening, though her lips smile. Outside, sunlight spills through the window, flooding the room with warmth. Chris walks in, holding a bouquet of white flowers. I know you love these more than anything, he says. Rose takes them, breathing in their calm scent. You remember I once said white flowers mean forgiveness? Now, to me, they mean beginnings. Chris leans forward and kisses her forehead. Then let me begin again every day with you and Ruby. She nods. Yes. They stand by the window, spring light soft on their shoulders, Ruby's laughter echoing from the balcony. That afternoon, Atlanta feels utterly still, no sirens, rain, just the wind, the sunlight, and the faint perfume of white flowers drifting through the air. A city, a new season, a family found again after 8 years apart. And in each breath they take, something has quietly ended, and something new has begun.